Onimusha, Capcom's surprise breakout 2001 smash hit. Onimusha could be quickly summed up as someone looking at Resident Evil and going, what is... TLDR, 90s Capcom was peak. We are talking top of Mount Everest, hole in the locker room wall peak. Look over here, it's like, whoa! Go the arcades, it's like, wowee! Sweet sassy molassie, what is that? That, my friends, is Capcom. One of the more impressive feats of Capcom in the 90s was popularizing survival horror for console games. Because yeah, PC owners had Alone in the Dark, but how many people were actually playing that game back then, and how many of those people weren't falling through the floor? Capcom brought survival horror to the home, coined the term and everything. And you don't just innovate a market, codify a genre, and not expect to, inspire some people. Resident Evil, but vampires.
Shit ain't nothing to me, man.
Resident Evil, but
big-ass lizard.
Resident Evil, but underwater. You remember that one? Where the big bad was just monkey. But what if Resident Evil with samurai? Onimusha took Resident Evil's framework and turned it into a sharp and speedy Sengoku samurai slasher with a serious emphasis on action. And I'm here to tell you that Capcom wasn't the first to put such an idea into practice. What if I told you Konami beat them to the punch 2 years prior with a PS1 title named Soul of the Samurai? Okay, so this page might seem a bit arbitrary to a lot of people, but I know there's a few out there that knows how yikes this is. Not much is known about Soul of the Samurai's development outside of some early details in some old gaming mags, and the fact that the director went on to direct Puzzles and Dragons. So I'm sure it doesn't bother him much. I can't even find a scan for the game's manual. That's what we're working with here. I can say that the game was released a whole few weeks before Onimusha's original PS1 trailer was unveiled. And yeah, I could bring up this 97 interview with Capcom alum Yoshiki Okamoto about Sengoku Biohazard, but that implies it was going to be closer to a trad Resident Evil game. Also meant for the N64 DD, so I think it's safe to say Konami wasn't eyeing up anyone's homework. But if we truly want to understand the layers of this cake, we're going to have to dig in. So let's see this bad boy in action. Oh, all right. Oh, so it's a bit dusty. Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with a little grit, a little texture. As stated earlier, Soul of the Samurai takes on the soul of Resident Evil. Pre-rendered backgrounds, chunky movement, square pegs, square holes. But there are some key differences. Before any of that, though, what's the premise? What's going on? Why am I here? Resident Ronin rascal Kotaro Hiba is returning home from when he encounters a kunoichi named... So throughout this whole video, I may or may not have mispronounced Lean's name as Lena, but I think we can be adults and move past this, and our relationship will be stronger for it. Lena and... Oh shit, we going Compton style? You see, Kotaro is based. I was just advocating for you. Do not make me look bad. After dispatching some cops and splitting up, Kotaro finds himself heading towards his old dojo to catch up with a childhood friend. It's here the player gets a flashback tutorial where... I like your cut, G. Here, the player can practice with the game's combat to their heart's content. I repeat, you get to beat up a child for however long you wish, for free! And since a manual for this game doesn't exist in the known universe, it feels like the devs wanted you to try and figure some of the deeper stuff out. Like your friend here will tell you some basic maneuvers, but for the rest, you gotta run that glop of gray matter through some cycles. Lucky for you, I'm here with the lowdown. Firstly, no gun. Sword. Solo Sam uses a sort of dual control scheme where the analog stick is for speed and the D-pad is for the need for less speed. Look, you write the script if you think it's so easy. It's a setup similar to what the Onimusha series would be adopting a whole half-decade later. The major deviation from that game, however, is the complete lack of tank controls, opting instead to use a sort of free movement system. That doesn't mean it's without some chunk and clunk, as there is a bit of delay when turning. So slick maneuvering requires a bit of forethought. But I mean, look at that gait. Does that not look like a man with full control and shitted up pants? You know how Onimusha's all pow pow smash bang? Soul of the Samurai is a bit more. Combat in this game takes a bit more of a considered approach. Kinda like the original Resident Evil, you won't be facing more than about 3 guys a screen, and you will not be dash dancing around. Instead, you'll be embodying the samurai spirit.
To them, they probably thought I was just moving out of the way, but I was actually setting up to where their blind spot was. If he had gone on me, I was planning to go in completely, drop the sword down, and then completely cut it. The sad truth is that they weren't even a challenge. It's folded, tempered, and it does its job.
Battles are more akin to a dance, requiring you to understand when to be passive and when to push back, when to be proactive, and where to be reactive. I know what this looks like, but you just gotta trust me. This isn't a game where you can simply mash to win. Not just because the basic combos require some bit of timing, but because enemies got hands. They'll react to the careless player with sharp movements and rapid retorts, and you don't want to catch too many strays. Respect your opponents, or get them boo-boos. And don't think you can just heal the problems away, as restoratives are finite, and even though you can heal any time with the press of a button, that restoration is gradual, giving enemies ample time to cut you down. But it's not like you're totally bereft of options in a brawl. Holding R1 locks the player onto the nearest foe while keeping your guard up, allowing you to reliably protect yourself. From here, all kinds of techniques can be performed based on the directions you combine with the attack button. Whether just out of reach or creeping up your thighs, you've got options. If you're feeling extra saucy, you can even parry with a properly timed block, knocking their weapons away and leaving them wide open. But if you truly want to become one of the blade, you can opt to try an even more daring parry that results in the ultimate counter kill. My favorite maneuvers involve the forward dash, either to step into attacks to actively deflect them, or the dash slash, which is a fast way to close in on enemies and that feels good. It's a system that requires spatial awareness, as enemies can be real mean. Still some decent room for expression though. I should also mention that you've got an MP bar. That's for special moves. These special moves provide plenty of useful versatility, be it clipping some bench who won't sit still, or lining up some poor saps. And more skills can be acquired by killing jobbers and leveling up. So once we've gotten our fill of some good bonking, Kotaro bumps into... Okay bro, you know this guy is no good. You know what you have to do. Surprisingly, despite slicing up local lawmen with nary a care, Kotaro doesn't immediately turn this guy into salami. He can be a bit slow. The Soul of the Samurai is centered in one major hub area that connects the rest of the levels. A station square, if you will. The adjoining areas in practice are linear levels. Point A to B affairs either connect to other locations or dead ends. It's pretty much always apparent where to go at all times, but if you do happen to wander the wrong way, or you just got a little curious, you usually are rewarded with a healing item. And considering this is pretty much the only way to find them, it can pay to go off the beaten path. I wouldn't get too friendly with the hub though, even less so with the people that populate it. It doesn't last long, which is part of a bigger thing I'll go into later. For now, there's something strange going on. Everyone seems on edge. Oh, sweetie, that's just the police. My guy, I don't really think that's a question that's open for debate. Yeah, so you might have heard me mention the lawmen acting extra mean earlier and are now wondering what's the deal with all these literal freaks? Well, you see, the reason the local law enforcement is acting especially aggressive is not because they are in fact police.
Every day is a good day for excessive force.
But because they were, aw, come on, people walk there. They were infected with these so-called soul bugs made by this guy, for this guy and this guy, to use for exactly what you'd expect. Take over Japan, rule the land. Anyway, let's rescue this poor monk from the local goonery. The bosses of Soul of the Samurai do a wowing job of highlighting the combat's strengths. Take the first boss here. He's basically just a beefed up version of the guys you've been fighting up to that point, but he has one really telegraphed attack that you will respect. The second boss tests your ability to dodge properly, as most of his attacks will just ignore your guard and his thick ass takes up most of the fucking screen. The third boss is constantly teleporting around the arena and throwing out fast unblockable magic, punishing the player for holding their guard and playing too cautiously. Admittedly, he kinda buckles after you get a handle on that, at least until he starts flying around, after which you truly have to prove your mobility ability. Mastery of the system is frequently put to the test by these guys. when they aren't being stunlocked in the timeout zone. The other half of the gameplay is mostly just running around some decently detailed environments, solving the odd lock and key puzzle in the most generous use of the word, and well, Soul of the Samurai is actually a rather varied game. Despite what I said earlier, rarely are you just doing the old A to B hustle. Usually there's some gimmick or a small shakeup to make things interesting. Otherwise, the areas are short enough to not get repetitive. Actually, that can be applied to the game as a whole. Eesh. Yeah, that's not how long each individual campaign is. That's the whole game front to back. I am of two minds with this. On one hand, I actually don't mind a game that I can sit down with in 100% in an afternoon, other than X4. There I go again. A short, tight experience will be a bloated slog any day. Shifting our attention to the other hand, though, it kind of feels like the game doesn't flesh out or iterate on its ideas at all. In a sense, it almost feels like a tech demo or a straight vertical slice. Take, for example, the next chapter of Kotaro's campaign. After rescuing a woman from some goons, he agrees to escort her into the temple that he's headed to. Normally, I'd roll my eyes and shit myself. An escort mission in a crunchy PS1 game? Bruh. But to my surprise, it may actually be one of the best escort missions I've played. Not only is it extremely short, but instead of essentially babysitting a fork-brandishing infant near an especially alluring wall socket, as one would expect, the woman will actively display basic self-preservation. Plus, like a shy GF who crumples under the weight of social expectancy, she waits in the back of the room until everyone else is gone. Weirdly enough, it made some weird notch click in my head. I truly felt like a Yojimbo protecting a helpless innocent, constantly outnumbered and needing to watch both my enemies and the person I'm protecting. Good stuff. But once it's done, that's it. No iteration on the idea, no evolution or higher stakes in the situation.
Gone.
It's the same with the side quests. Each campaign has a couple side quests, and by a couple I mean like 3 each. The 4th chapter randomly becomes a Musou game. Shit, that's like 2 franchises that owes this game a little thank you. And maybe some head. If you manage to kill enough goons in time, you're given a rusty sword, which you can then take to the father of the woman you escorted back in the 2nd chapter. What he does is turn it into the best sword in the game, which does allow you to just straight up mash. Baba, you earned that. There's also this guy. He basically tells you, meet me at the beach, puss, no balls, you won't. Okay. But if you do decide to go and beat him, he gives you his dual swords that have a slightly different playstyle. To digress for a moment, the plot to this game isn't anything special, it's kinda cliche actually, but there are some scant moments that have a little feeling behind them. This guy, for example, it's heavily implied he challenged Kotaro in order to be slain in an honorable duel, instead of by some hideous monster roaming the countryside. Both stories have you help this random guy in the main area, and he lets you change your outfit as thanks. And to quell your fears, yes, there is a schoolgirl outfit, it is a universal constant after all, so there are some extra things to do. Just not much. Ultimately, Soul of the Samurai feels like a proof of concept that was polished up and released as is. It's easy to get swept up in the moment to moment, but pulling back the view to the whole picture, you realize there's barely any connective tissue to these elements outside of a few cutscenes. I'm in a temple full of ninja, now I'm in a cave full of Cretans, which leads back to the main square that is now also overrun with Cretans. Then I go back to the dojo to fight Yukinosuke, then I'm going to the daimyo's castle and then it's done. To prove my point about this game having random stuff thrown in, here's some enemies that I'm pretty sure only show up on this screen. It truly is a shame because what is here is genuinely a tight, fun play. This should be a good time to mention that Soul Sam sometimes attempts to play into its survival horror roots, even having monsters and jump scares. That feel when the hardware snitches you out though. Closest it gets is the caves, and it's not really scary. Just unsettling. At first. There is this one moment where the most hideous abomination in creation comes to pursue you through the caves you spent the level beforehand exploring. Now this would be a lot cooler if the right path wasn't so soft head simple. Much like some other fucking games, Solo Sam features dual pro tags, with the ninja girl from the beginning being the other campaign. A male samurai and a female ninja. Capcom, do you have anything to say? I know I've been a bit facetious about the whole Onimusha ripping off Soul of the Samurai thing. And at first I was going to avoid making comparisons because I figured it'd be kind of limp, but there might be some merit to looking at both side by side. If I had to boil the big points down, I'd just say that Soul of the Samurai is a more faithful approach to adapting the Resident Evil formula into a samurai motif. You know, slower paced gameplay with a plot involving people in power using these parasitic entities to create monsters in order to gain more power and take over the world. Whereas Onimusha includes more genuine demons and stuff from hell. Even the whole male samurai, female ninja dynamic is more of a symptom of pop culture. Because while female samurai did exist, how much modern media have you seen actually depict them? And far be it from Konami and Capcom to break the mold. So one female, one male, just like Resident Evil. One thing that can be looked at is both games' defanging of the horror elements and focus on action. At this point, Resident Evil was already trending more towards action. But both games, Onimusha and Soul of the Samurai, basically go full action with some minor horror elements in like the aesthetics. And maybe the idea of characters using exclusively close range combat sort of pushes more towards that action idea, but it is interesting to see how Soul of the Samurai incorporates things like quick stepping and counters, just like Onimusha would. Onimusha being faster and more developed since it came out later. So in the end, no. I don't think there was any real homework eyeing going on, but it is interesting to see the crossover and design that these games would take, especially considering Konami's effort came well beforehand. I think it's worth talking about both campaigns in conjunction. You see, whereas Kotaro, you mostly just saunter to your next destination, Lena has to converse with at least one human being to know where to go. Blech. Lena requires a slightly different approach to her campaign, usually involving more thinking and legwork than Kotaro. It's fitting considering she's a spy from another town that arrived to investigate the situation, meet with her comrades, and find her brother. So unlike Kotaro, who grew up here and knows where everything is, Lena needs to figure things out herself. The player is effectively placed in the sandals of the characters. Kotaro, being a simple guy who leaps without looking, is constantly moving forward, and his chivalrous spirit leads him to helping others. Lena, on the other hand, is an outsider and a spy, so naturally she needs to ask questions and follow leads to figure out where she needs to go next. Even shines through in the final chapter of each campaign as Kotaro barrels through the front door and up the castle like the true Kota Crow Magnon that he is. Lena opts to take the roof like a ninja. There are even smaller, neater details, like if you played Lena's campaign first, you may notice there being a random hole in the center of town where Buddha once was. Yo, isn't that like sacrilegious or something? Well, actually, that's where Kotaro managed to escape the cave he was trapped in. Lena's combat remains mostly the same. The biggest change is Lena has throwing weapons that you can assign to the circle button, making it so you have to decide whether or not you want quick access to weapons or healing. It's not crazy tactics, but it does change the dynamic a bit. The game is essentially asking the player if they're confident enough to forego speed for the sake of healing, an idea that's reinforced by the fact that Lena's special attacks are all based around her throwing weapons. Lena's weapons are shorter and faster, and a basic combo lasts for 5 hits as opposed to just 3. Still have to be careful with it. One of my favorite parts of Lena's campaign is the boss fight with Karasu. She's totally unique in that besides having the best theme in the game twice, she'll also start hopping to the platforms in the background. Now normally the jump in this game is practically worthless unless you decide you want to leave orbit. Here though, it becomes essential to the fight, chasing her up and down the stilts. Another neat thing about this boss is that Karasu in Japanese refers to the genus of bird that crows and ravens belong to. So in her theme, they incorporate crow calls as part of the music. A bit on the nose, but it truly turns the track into a highlight. Actually, on the topic of music, cool. Yeah, pretty much sums it up. Incorporating a mixture of electronic sounds with trad Japanese instruments to form music that still feels unique to this day. Like hit me with that D&B any day. Don't even get me started on the song that has the sound that fills your ears. That's some real fine cooking. Really, the more I think about it, the more this game makes me recall Finny the Fish. Bear with me here, you see Finny was also a rather short and pleasant experience, clocking in at a somewhat similar runtime. I remember saying that that game teetered on the edge of being too short, but with how simple Finny's gameplay loop was, the lack of bloat did that game nothing but favors, even if they could have done more. And I know, I mentioned it's nice having a short experience outside of I don't even remember doing it this time! But in the case of Soul of the Samurai, I couldn't help but feel unsatisfied with its length. Don't feel bad, sweetie, it's not you, it's me. I think it's because this game is ultimately more engaging than Finny and displays more potential with its structure. For example, the escort mission. It was wild having an escort mission click for me and not just become fun, but immersive. Is this game real? But imagine if you had to escort whichever protagonist you didn't pick out of the castle as it was about to blow, with them able to limply defend themselves. Or hell, just have you both run in and slicing through the last of the monsters to escape. The town connecting the levels as a central hub could have had more done with exploring and talking to NPCs. Maybe Lena could have done more investigation work, considering her chapter is the only one that has you talk to certain NPCs to progress. On top of using clues to solve a side quest involving a special sword that's brought up in the story, that if found, becomes her ultimate weapon. The bosses. A good chunk of Soul of Sam's bosses do great in testing your skills and ability to adapt. One big thing that strikes me with this game is how characters' tutorials have them training with someone important to them back when they were younger. Kotaro with his childhood friend and Lena with her brother, and then it pits them against each other for their pentultimate boss fights. It's such a simple thing, but the way the game uses its more unorthodox tutorial that basically throws you into the pool to figure it out. The way you're only given basic information and made to feel it out yourself against an opponent that isn't lethal, but can put up a fight, right near the start, and then having you fight that same person near the end of the game. The growth between the characters and the player and the passing of time between then and now is contextualized through the playthrough. Starting out barely able to swing a stick, told you weren't even ready to spar yet, and now facing each other down, having learned from the battles, stronger than ever. Being placed in the shoes of the character as a child, as the player is essentially still a child of the game mechanics, and then facing that same character as an adult, having time to mature and grow with the game's combat, both of you now being more skilled and more dangerous than before. To take it one step further, in the tutorial, you were both training. There were no health bars, it only ended when you decided you were done. But near the end, in the actual boss fights, it's a fight to the death, and it only ends when one of your health bars runs out. On Kotaro's side of things, he gets the second best sword in the game that symbolizes the newfound trust the game has in the player by being extremely powerful, but also being the trickiest to handle. You can't block with it, and you lose your more versatile skills. But it hurts lots. There's a deliberateness to this game's design. Up to this point, I haven't mentioned the fact that you can sheath your sword, because there really doesn't seem to be a point to it. You can get around just fine Nippon steel drawn like a sociopath. Around enemies, however, you can't leave the screen while your sword's drawn. The game is essentially telling you if you want to move faster, if you want to skip these fights, you best be able to skibbity around the enemies without taking too many hits. You must use what you've learned to load it. I think we ought to wrap this up. It all cleans up how you would expect. Whoever you played second has to fight that daimyo guy reanimated, which then transitions to the true final boss. Guess who? You then choose who you want to fight the final boss, with the other one swapping in if you die. The final boss is really simple and really easy, but the camera shift after you do enough damage is cool. And then you see the ending of whoever it was you picked. Soul of the Samurai was somehow both more and less than what I expected. An experience that burns bright, but in the end too short to leave its mark. It's a shame that we didn't get a sequel or a follow-up, because even though Onimusha would lay its flag and solidify itself as the Resident Evil inspired samurai game, I feel Soul could have gone its own way in a slower pace closer to Resident Evil style. My big takeaway from it is that while a fun, tight, and considered game, it just doesn't feel like enough. And even in 1999, you could buy this, or you could buy, oh Jesus, 99 was stacked. But that doesn't make this game any less worthwhile. It's worth the afternoon it takes to complete this on the merits of being a fun game. Not every game has to innovate, and some things can just be fun, you know? I mean, the devs were definitely having fun with it. Look at all these blood colors. Oh no. I mean, it's basically a playable PS1 samurai action B-movie. What the fuck more do you need? I mean, the save files have haikus for each chapter, god damn it. Some may think I'm exaggerating, but I felt how I did when I played it, and I can definitely say, Soul of the Samurai is cool. Hey, hi, thank you for watching this whole thing, if you made it this far. I'm not good with words. So, and I really hate having to tell people to like, comment, subscribe, because that's obvious. If those things are in your head, regardless, I don't have a ton of social media because I don't do a lot of that, but I guess that could change if I get enough followers. So I do have like a Twitter and stuff, if you want to look at that, I guess. Also, I have other videos. I want to do a big shout out to World of Longplays for having an archive of B-roll that I can use, because that's a really big deal, really big, for not having to seek out a bunch of games and play them, and that takes up time. So really appreciative to these people, specifically ScHlAuChi for their Street Fighter 3 Third Strike footage, Tsunao for their Mega Man Legends footage, Ravenlord for their Countdown Vampires footage, you goddamn trooper, you bless you. Spazbo4, that's the name, for all the Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 footage. MadMatty for the Deep Fear footage. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. And the World of Longplays site, like I said, a godsend for this kind of production. I think that's all I have. Stay tuned. I'm actually really excited for the next project. That's it. Yeah. Blades lit by the moonlight, waltzing within the pale glow. Death dances with men. The winds bear witness to a song of shrieking steel. Silver sirens kiss from a cell of flesh, behind a prison of bone. The sword frees the soul.